Nelson's mistress. Nelson's mistress was born in Cheshire with the name of Amy Lyon, the illegitimate daughter of a blacksmith, and some 26 years later became Lady Emma Hamilton, the wife of the English ambassador in Naples, where she met Horatio Nelson. Admiral Horatio Nelson died during the Sea Battle of Trafalgar, having been shot by a sniper from the rigging of a French warship. He was taken below, and his longtime friend Captain Hardy knelt by his side as Nelson died, asking that the British government would look after his longtime mistress, Lady Emma Hamilton, and their daughter Horatia. Nelson had first met Emma Hamilton when she was the young wife of the somewhat elderly British ambassador to the Kingdom of Naples, when Nelson stopped off in Naples whilst chasing the French fleet across the Mediterranean. Emma was popular in the court of the King of Naples and had become a friend of Queen Carolina. Nelson received intelligence that the 17-strong battle fleet of French warships was heading for Egypt, and he set sail after them with his own fleet of 15 warships. Nelson's dramatic destruction of the French fleet at the Battle of the Nile effectively put an end to Napoleon's sea power. Nelson stopped off on his way back to England in the port of Naples. Emma Hamilton and the King and Queen of Naples put on the biggest firework display and party for Nelson that had ever been seen before in the entire Mediterranean. Emma Hamilton and Horatio Nelson fell in love despite both being married to someone else. Catherine Barlow, Sir William Hamilton's first wife of some 25 years, had died some 10 years before Emma was introduced to Hamilton by his nephew, Charles Greville. Charles, at the time, was Emma's lover and was cohabiting with her and her mother, one Mary Cadogan, Mrs. Mary Cadogan, in his house at Paddington Green, a then suburb of London. Before Charles came on the scene, Emma was living with Sir Harry Fanshawe, who had taken the teenage Emma as his girlfriend, or mistress, to live with him in his stately home at Up Park. Sir Henry was a senior member of the aristocracy and a member of Parliament, but he never once spoke in the House of Commons. He was described as a witless playboy who passed most of his time in sexual and hunting adventures. To be fair to the guy, he ended up marrying the head dairymaid, one Mary Ann, when she was 18 or 19, and upon his death left his entire estate to her. Mind you, Henry was over 70 at the time of the marriage. Luckily for Emma, Henry needed a new hostess to entertain his guests at the many parties and soirees he hosted at Up Park. It was at one of these parties that she encountered for the second time Charles Greville, and for the second time rejected his advances. The first time Emma had met Charles Greville was when she was working as a model and dancer at the Temple of Health for a doctor, James Graham, and Greville became quite besotted about the 14-year-old Emma. Emma was baptised Amy Lyon and was born out of wedlock in Cheshire on April 26, 1765, the only child of a village blacksmith who died when she was 5 years old. Her mum, Mary Lyon, had a removal business, which actually meant she had a horse and cart. With no formal education whatsoever, Amy, when she was 12, was placed in service with a local doctor and his family, but this didn't last long as her mum decided that Neston, Cheshire was not the centre of the universe and moved with Amy to Blackfriars in London, where Amy worked as an under-housemaid for Dr. Budd, who was a surgeon. Amy's mum changed her own name to Mrs. Cadogan, and Amy became Emily Lyon, as this was felt to be more genteel. Emily, or rather Emma, shared a room with another under-housemaid called Jane, who would later become the famous Drury Lane actress, Mrs. William Powell. The two girls, aged around 14, contrived to get auditions with Dr. Graham at his famous Temple of Health, and both were accepted. Emma played the role of the goddess of perfect youth, Hebe Vestina, and sold drinks, while Dr. Graham made long medical speeches on sex. The two young ladies also danced, posed and sang, as well as selling marital aids and potions. The centerpiece of the temple was a giant bed containing 6 nymphs guaranteed to cure impotence. Actually, this was not a backstreet cat house at all, rather a respected medical centre for curing sexual problems, frequently visited by married couples seeking cures for their problems in conceiving or impotence. And I suspect it was also a place for young gentlemen to encounter attractive young women. Charles Greville was the second son of the Earl of Warwick, and he was brought up in the family home of Warwick Castle. Like all second sons, he was merely the spare and had a small fixed income of around £500 a year. That's around £50,000 in modern money. And a job working for the Admiralty at the Navy Office. He enjoyed the company of Emma, but was outshone by another visitor to the Temple of Health, the young baronet, Sir Harry Fanshawe. Sir Henry became entranced with Emma and invited the 15-year-old to his stately home in Up Park. The 15-year-old Emma became the hostess to the many parties thrown by Sir Harry for the young swinging set of 1781. But she managed to shock even the very worldly Harry by dancing topless on the dining room table during a party. Then the worst happened. Emma became a little bit pregnant, and on revealing this, Sir Harry Fanshawe, he threw Emma and Mrs. Cadogan out with a small purse of money and told them to piss off because he didn't believe the child was his. With nowhere to go, Emma contacted Charles Greville and batted her eyelids at him, and a deal was struck. Greville took Emma as his mistress on condition that the child was fostered out, so when the baby Emma Carew was born, she was deposited with John Blackburn and his wife in Manchester. Greville agreed that he would make a small allowance to Mrs. Blackburn in Manchester to bring up Emma's baby, and he installed Emma in a small house in Paddington Green, which at the time was a village in the rural outskirts of London. Emma's mother, Mrs. Cadogan, was to live with her as a housekeeper and chaperone. Greville ordered that Emma change her name to Mrs. Emma Hart, dressed in modest outfits in more subdued colours, and gave up her wild and flirtatious ways. Emma was the prototype Eliza Doolittle, and Greville the original Professor Henry Higgins. Greville taught Emma to enunciate elegantly and taught her the social graces. After a while, he started to invite some friends to meet her, and that went well, and so he moved both Emma and her mum, Mrs. Cadogan, into his flat in Portman Square. Charles's best friend, the painter George Romney, was one of the most fashionable artists of the day, painting many leading social society figures. Seeing an opportunity to make money by taking a cut of the sales, Greville sent Emma to sit for his friend, who was looking for a new model. Romney was entranced by Emma, and within a very short time she was posing for her portrait at his studio. Romney was sketching her in the nude, clothed, and in many poses that he later used to create paintings in her absence. Romney painted more than 60 portraits of her in various poses, sometimes playing the part of historical or mythological figures, all of which sold well. Because of the popularity of Romney's paintings of Emma and her striking good looks, Emma Hart became well known in social circles. She was a quick learner, witty, intelligent, elegant and beautiful, and Greville was pleased with the additional income from Emma's modelling. Charles Greville was a Fellow of the Royal Society. His special interest was in minerals and precious stones, and he was a good friend of Joseph Banks, and his uncle, the ambassador to Naples, Sir William Hamilton, was also a good friend of Joseph Banks, who took part in Captain Cook's first voyage. Banks visited Brazil, Tahiti, New Zealand, Australia, and made Kew Gardens the world's leading botanical garden centre. Sir William Hamilton and his wife Catherine were the world's leading experts on Greek and Etruscan vases, not to mention volcanoes. When his wife Catherine died, the 53-year-old William Hamilton lost not only his wife, but his lifelong colleague. In order to fulfill the late Catherine's last wishes, William Hamilton brought her body back to England so that she could be buried on her family's Welsh estate at Selbeck. Whilst he was in London, Sir William stayed with his nephew Greville and Emma, and later Sir William took Emma and Charles to visit the estates he had inherited from his wife. Sir William nicknamed Emma the Fair Tea Maker. Shortly before Sir William returned to Naples, he bought a portrait of Emma from Romney, and Emma and her mother left London for an extensive visit to Emma's child in Cheshire. Whilst Emma was away, Charles started entertaining the daughter of Lord Middleton of Woollerton Hall, although he was disappointed to hear that her sister had only received a dowry of £29,000 on her marriage. Charles knows that he must find himself a rich wife. He tells Romney that he needs a wife with an income of at least £2,000 a year if he is to be able to continue in the style to which he is becoming accustomed. In today's money, that would be around £150,000 a year. Charles's relationship with Lord Middleton's daughter breaks up because of Emma when the daughter finds out that Emma is his mistress. He realizes that if he is to marry a fortune, he must dispose of Emma. Emma is, of course, aware of Charles's relationship with Lord Middleton's daughter and is distressed. She has, for the most part, kept her bargain with Charles, being pretty faithful to him, with the exception of sleeping with Romney. So Charles and Romney hatch a plot to get Emma out of the way, and Naples seems like a good distance. They both write to Sir William Hamilton extolling her virtues. Sir William Hamilton writes back that he would be delighted to allow Charles £50 per annum if that sum would help Charles support his mistress. This is not the solution that Charles wants. So Romney writes to Sir William saying that Emma has a thing for Sir William, and Charles tells Mrs. Cadogan, Emma's mum, to persuade Emma to write kind letters to Sir William, as Sir William has a thing for her, and she must be nice to his rich uncle. Charles then announces that he has to go away for a few months to visit his relations, and it would be difficult to take his mistress to visit his family. He suggests it would be a good idea if Emma and Mrs. Cadogan ask Sir William if they could visit him in Naples. Charles would join them in Naples once he'd completed his visit to his relations. Emma talks to Romney about the visit to Naples, and he, of course, says that he thinks it's a smashing idea and that Emma should take this opportunity to see Europe. So Emma writes to Hamilton asking if she and her mum can visit, and Sir William Hamilton responds that he would be delighted to have them. Emma and her mum, Mrs. Cadogan, set off by coach across the Channel to France and then on to Naples. They arrive in Naples on Emma's 21st birthday, and Sir William, under the impression that the beautiful Emma is in love with him, gives her a very warm welcome party. She and her mum are installed in an apartment of 4 rooms overlooking Naples Bay. Charles Grenville sends a letter to Sir William saying that Emma appears to be half in love with him, and that if he should wish to keep the fair tea maiden on extended loan, then he, Charles, would totally understand. Emma is plunged into a much higher social strata than before in the elegant city of Naples. Sir William takes Emma sailing, to parties, and arranges Italian language lessons. In those days, Italy was divided up into states, with Queen Carolina and King Ferdinand ruling the two Sicilies. Their territory became known unofficially as the Kingdom of Naples, and it ruled central and southern part of Italy, Sicily, Sardinia, and Malta. Sir William, as the British ambassador, frequently attends court at the royal palace of King Ferdinand and Queen Carolina. The Queen's sister is Marie Antoinette, wife of King Louis XVI of France. Marie Antoinette is soon to be beheaded in Paris after suggesting that the starving populace should eat cake when their bread runs out. Emma quickly learns to speak Italian and gives a good account of herself at the court events and in Naples' top echelon society. She still expects Charles Greville to arrive and take her back to London, and in her letters to Charles she tells him how much she loves him and misses him. Romney reminds Charles of the financial consequences of trying to support a mistress and won't let Charles reply to any of Emma's letters. Queen Carolina wants a new garden for the palace and asks Sir William to contact his friend Joseph Banks to design it. Joseph Banks sends one of his assistants, Thomas Graffer and his family, to Naples, and Sir William puts Emma in charge of looking after the Graffer family. Emma's taken to court and formally presented to Queen Carolina, with whom she collaborates in the development of the Queen's new garden. During the next few years, Emma becomes in every sense Sir William's mistress. She runs his house, she gives dinners, accompanies him on visits to the ballet and opera, and now she always sleeps in his bedroom. Sir William encourages her to entertain his guests after dinner parties by performing her attitudes and singing, telling Emma that she and her mum, Mrs. Cadogan, will always be provided for. It's a very turbulent time in Europe, particularly in France, and news of the storming of the Bastille arrives in Naples. Sir William is summoned to the court to give Queen Carolina his opinion of what the British government thinks will happen in France. Hamilton tells the Queen that the troubles in Paris are very serious and that the English government is concerned for the future of the French monarchy. Whilst Queen Carolina is friendly to Emma, treats her as a lady of some standing, the English gentry and nobility visiting Sir William in Naples are pretty disapproving of Emma, partly because of her background and partly the difference in their ages, with Emma being 26 and Sir William almost 60. Emma suggests that these gossiping mouths would be shut if they were to get married and live happily ever after in Naples. Emma points out that it's only fair they marry, as her reputation is now hopelessly compromised by her living openly with Sir William. He agrees, and they pact to return to England to ask permission of the king, which he's required to do as an ambassador. And Queen Carolina asks them to visit her sister, Marie Antoinette, in Paris on their way back to Naples from London. They arrive in London and they stay with the Duchess of Bath. Sir William introduces Emma to his friends and relations and goes to court to beg leave of the king to marry Emma. King George is not impressed because London society is displeased by the thought of Charles Greville's ex-mistress, a girl from the Temple of Health, marrying into the nobility. King George compromises and says, whilst Emma may not be presented at the English court and she may not be the ambassadress of England in Naples, Sir William may marry her if it's done discreetly. In return for allowing the marriage at all, the king asks that his 18-year-old son, Prince Augustus, Duke of Sussex, can stay with Sir William in Naples on an extended visit in order to consolidate his European education. In a small church in Marylebone, Emma, under the name of Miss Amy Lyon, is married to Sir William Hamilton. The next day, they depart for Paris to visit Queen Marie Antoinette, who hands Emma letters and messages for her sister, Queen Carolina of Naples. Sir William and the new Lady Hamilton arrive back in Naples, and Emma goes to the court to deliver the letters and messages from Marie Antoinette to her sister. This is the beginning of Emma's close liaison with Queen Carolina. The Queen is now extremely concerned for her sister's security, not unsurprisingly, and asks Emma to use her influence with Sir William to persuade the British government to go to the aid of the failing French monarchy in Paris. Prince Augustus, the Duke of Sussex, King George's 18-year-old son, arrives in Naples for his extended stay with the Hamiltons. They quickly discover that education is far from his mind, as he's having a passionate affair with Lady Augusta Murray, who's some 10 years older than the prince and has also, by chance, just arrived in Naples. Sir William is required to send weekly reports back to King George, which he and Emma have to compose with great care. They dare not expose the affair with Lady Augusta, as it's well underway, and Prince Augustus is, despite his age, politically dangerous and powerful. King George, of course, would not forgive the Hamiltons for letting things get to this advanced stage in their own home. Sir William's health starts to deteriorate with his worry over the Prince Augustus romance problem and the fact that the prince, who suffers from asthma, has now become ill with rheumatic fever. The prince has a personal physician called Dr. Murray, who asks Emma to obtain some drugs from the royal physician to Queen Carolina. When Emma makes the request, Queen Carolina, anxious about the illness of the son of the British king, instructs her physician to work exclusively on the health of the royal invalid. Prince Augustus is so impressed by the Italian royal doctor and his attentions that he refuses to have anything further to do with his English Dr. Murray and fires him. The unfortunate Dr. Murray commits suicide in his bedroom in the Hamiltons' house. This leaves Emma and Sir William with a dead body in their house at a time when they're already sitting on a powder keg of scandal with the prince's passionate affair with Lady Augusta. Emma tells Queen Carolina about the body problem, and the Queen orders one of her senior naval officers to smuggle the body out of the house and get rid of it. Emma and Sir William encourage Prince Augustus to return to England because of recent developments in the extremely dangerous situation to the monarchy in France. He agrees to return to London, but only after having married Lady Augusta Murray secretly in Rome. King Ferdinand is also very concerned at the way his royal cousins, King Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, are being treated in France. He gives Sir William a very hard time because of England's refusal to get involved. A fleet of French warships then sail into Naples harbour, and the French admiral anchors just beyond the range of the Naples guns. The fleet has arrived without prior permission or invitation, and King Ferdinand and Queen Carolina start to feel very insecure. On King Ferdinand's birthday, the French admiral gives a huge banquet on board his flagship for the anti-royalist Republican sympathisers in Naples. The French fleet then sails the next morning without the correct salutes, and 2 days later the news of the execution of King Louis XVI arrives. France then declares war against England, and Queen Carolina is delighted, as this might mean a reprieve for her sister Marie Antoinette. She becomes even more vehement in demanding that Emma must make Sir William persuade the British government to invade France and save her sister. Naples has now become an important centre in England's war against France militarily, and dispatches arrive from London instructing Sir William to make a treaty of alliance with Ferdinand and England. King Ferdinand quickly concludes signing the treaty with Sir William, and the dispatches are returned to London overland just as into Naples Bay sails the English 64-gun third-rate ship of the line, HMS Agamemnon, commanded by one Captain Horatio Nelson. Nelson is carrying orders for Sir William from Admiral Hood that he and Nelson meet with the King of Naples. They are to persuade him to send his Neapolitan army to help the English allies holding Toulon against the French Republican army. Sir William arranges for supplies to be delivered to Nelson's ship, the HMS Agamemnon, and he invites Nelson and his stepson, Josiah Nesbitt, to move into his house. Emma has the now vacant rooms of Prince Augustus prepared for Nelson and his stepson, but is not particularly impressed by the arrival of this young, low-ranking English naval officer. In order to get the negotiations started, Sir William asks Emma to intercede directly on Nelson's behalf with Queen Carolina and arrange a meeting between the King and Nelson. A hunting party is organised, and during this the King accedes to all Nelson's requests for military aid for the British against the French. Then the royal family dines at the Hamiltons, and Nelson is placed on the King's right hand, and Emma begins to gain some insight into the importance of a relatively low-ranking naval officer in the time of war. At the end of the dinner, Emma, with Sir William doing the lighting effects, sings and entertains them all by performing her attitudes. Nelson gives a breakfast on board HMS Agamemnon for the local British gentry and for the Hamiltons. This is interrupted by the news that a French man-of-war and 3 other ships have anchored near Sardinia. Although his ship is not fully resupplied, Nelson asks his guests to excuse him and has them taken back ashore, whilst he clears for action to attack the French and set sail. Sir William falls ill, and Queen Carolina sends presents of quinine to Sir William. During Sir William's illness, Emma carries on the ambassadorial duties of sending military, political intelligence regularly back to England. As the English ambassador's wife, Emma is now a person of some political importance to the court of Naples. Queen Carolina feeds Emma secret bits of information gathered by her personal spies, and in particular news of Spain's secret plan to make peace and to form an alliance with France. Queen Carolina secretly informs Emma in advance of these decisions, and Emma reports back them to England. Queen Carolina receives the tragic news of the execution of her sister Marie Antoinette, and then hears that the Neapolitan armies, who are fighting with the English in Toulon against the French, have suffered heavy casualties, and the wounded have started arriving back in Naples. King Ferdinand decides to withdraw all their troops from France and to sue for peace with Napoleon. Naples becomes neutral and closes its port to all foreign ships at war with the French, and it releases all French prisoners men of war, just as Spain also declares war on England. Queen Carolina tells Emma that Austria has been defeated, and worse, there are rumours that northern Italy is now going to join Napoleon Bonaparte. Emma reports this intelligence to the British government in her dispatches. News reaches Sir William and Emma that there has been a splendid English victory over the Spanish fleet at Cape St. Vincent. When all looked to be lost, Captain Nelson's ship, HMS Agamemnon, has made a brave manoeuvre and turned the tide of the battle. Emma takes this news to court, where both Carolina and Ferdinand are delighted. However, the rumours of northern Italy going over to the anti-republican royalists looks like coming true. Sir William suggests that if the Neapolitan forces were to march on Rome, they could provoke a similar action from the Austrians in the north, leaving the French in northern Italy at the mercy of both armies. The ambassador's house in Naples has become very expensive to run because of the amount of important visitors expecting hospitality, which has severely strained Sir William's funds. He starts making an inventory of all his Etruscan vases and his paintings, as the political future looks bleak, and he intends selling his entire collection of Etruscan vases in order to replenish his bank account. Emma handles all Hamilton's political duties, leaving him free to work on his inventory, as she is now very much ambassadress to Naples, although still without title. Admiral Horatio Nelson, now minus his right arm, which he lost at the Battle of Santa Cruz de Tenerife, heaves to with his fleet outside Naples harbour. He sends Captain Trowbridge ashore to see the Hamiltons, asking them to obtain permission from the King and Queen for Nelson's ships to use Naples harbour. Emma goes immediately to Queen Carolina, telling her that Nelson has reported that 13 French ships of the line and 400 transports have sailed from Toulon and that they could be bound for Naples. Nelson offers to leave some of his warships to help defend Naples if he is permitted to use the harbour, whilst he takes the rest of his fleet to attack the French. Queen Carolina and King Ferdinand agree to allow British ships to use the port, and Admiral Nelson sets off in pursuit of the French fleet, who are proving very difficult to locate. He sends a ship back to Naples and, via Sir Hamilton, asks the king for the loan of Neapolitan frigates to help search the Mediterranean for the elusive Bonaparte fleet. King Ferdinand refuses. Queen Carolina is now scared that she will suffer the same fate as her sister if Napoleon conquers her kingdom. She writes out prayers and then has them baked in cake and eats them, making Emma join in. Then the news arrives that Bonaparte has captured Malta, which is part of her kingdom, and the two Sicilies. Nelson sends another request for the loan of Neapolitan frigates, and this time via Emma, and the king, not unsurprisingly, agrees. Nelson receives intelligence that the French fleet is heading towards the Nile, and he orders his fleet to head for Egypt and Aboukir Bay. On arrival, he attacks the French, resulting in 2 French ships of the line and 2 frigates sunk, 9 ships of the line captured, and some 5,000 French being killed or wounded, with nearly 4,000 captured. The French navy is absolutely decimated, a total disaster for Bonaparte. News of Nelson's great victory of the Battle of the Nile arrives in Naples, and the court is in full cry with joy. Emma attends the formal royal celebration, wearing a bandeau around her head with the words, "Nelson and Victory." Nelson's victorious fleet, led by the flagship HMS Foudroyant of 74 guns, arrives back in Italy, and the Foudroyant enters Naples harbour, where Emma and Sir William are waiting in a small boat to welcome him. Once on board HMS Foudroyant, Emma embraces and congratulates Nelson, and the Hamiltons insist that he should come ashore and stay with them at the embassy. Emma organises a mammoth fireworks celebration enjoyed by the whole of Naples and presides at a grand party at the embassy. Emma sings her own words to God Save the King, celebrating Nelson's victory, and almost never leaves his side. She sits beside him at mealtimes so she can cut up his food as, having lost his arm at the Battle of Tenerife, he can only use a fork. As a climax to the party, Emma unveils a stone pier engraved with her words, "Glorify Nelson." And Nelson presents Emma with a black maid, Fatima, who he has captured in Egypt. Josiah Nesbitt, Nelson's stepson, also attends the party and celebrations, but he drinks too much and publicly starts expressing jealousy of the attention Emma is giving his stepfather. He starts a rather unpleasant scene, saying that Lady Hamilton is getting the attention his mother should have, perhaps with some reason. Nelson was certainly swept off his feet by the attention and adoration of the vivacious Emma. Sir William is delighted by the way Emma has celebrated the great victory of the returning hero, and is very welcoming and courteous towards Nelson, who in turn treats William with great respect. They start to form a mutual respect and bond. Emma, Nelson and Sir William spend their leisure time together, and Emma tells Nelson of the plan she and William tried to sell to King Ferdinand of getting Neapolitan troops to attack Rome and the French, and getting Austria to do the same. Nelson thinks it's a superb plan and speaks with Queen Carolina about it. She persuades the king to discuss it with Nelson and Sir William, and the king agrees to approach the Austrians and request their collaboration in attacking the French. Dispatches arrive from the Admiralty warning Nelson that the political situation is very unstable, and when Nelson warns Emma and Sir William of this, William asks Nelson for his advice on making certain of the safety of his art collection. Nelson tells him to have it all packed up in crates, and he will have it sent to England in his 74-gun ship of the line, HMS Colossus. News arrives from Vienna to King Ferdinand that the Austrians do not favour the Rome plan, as they think it's too dangerous, and King Ferdinand is going to abandon the idea. Queen Carolina leaks this to Emma, who of course gives advance news of this to Nelson. When Nelson is summoned to court and is told the news officially, he pretends to be angry with the king for suggesting they should give up the plan, saying it might be necessary for him to withdraw the protection of his fleet from Naples. Now this is a bluff, as he clearly did not have the authority to do this, but King Ferdinand is shaken and agrees to go ahead with the attack on the French in northern Italy, despite the non-assistance of the Austrians. On his return from the court to the Hamiltons, Nelson is told William has just received a letter from the British Foreign Secretary saying he considers the plan to be extremely dangerous and that Nelson should exercise extreme caution in advising the king to go ahead with it. The problem is, Emma and Nelson are now so committed they can see no way of asking King Ferdinand to cancel the attack. Nelson's relationship with Emma at this time was like that of conspirators. He always treated Emma with great respect, and her flattery increased his already rather swollen ego. Nelson even wrote letters home to his wife Fanny, singing the praises of the brilliant Lady Hamilton, and was somewhat surprised to receive a letter back from his wife suggesting that perhaps she should join him in Naples. Nelson was clearly fond of William Hamilton, greatly respecting his intellect and conversation. Hamilton was a fine historian of Greek and Roman empires and their arts, and his research into the volcanic activities of Vesuvius had resulted in the publication of several internationally acclaimed textbooks. Sir William packs his precious Etruscan vases and pictures, and Nelson's men load them on board HMS Colossus, which then sets sail for England. What follows is a disaster. As agreed with Nelson, King Ferdinand sends most of his army marching towards Rome, whilst Nelson embarks the remainder of the Neapolitan troops into his ships and sets sail for Leghorn, where he captures the entire Rome-based Ligurian navy. This actually only comprises of 2 small 21-gun ships. Nevertheless, King Ferdinand's army is successful and takes Rome from the French and occupies the city. Nelson sails back to Naples in Foudroyant with the rest of the fleet, plus the 2 captured ships, and moves into the embassy with Emma and Sir William. There is now considerable public unrest in Naples, the greater part of the population being sympathetic to the French Revolutionary Republic cause. This unrest is compounded 2 days later by the news that the French have counterattacked Rome, throwing out Ferdinand's army, which is now retreating in disorder back to Naples. There are demonstrations outside the palace demanding that the King and Queen form an alliance with Napoleon and France, and there is danger of a revolution similar to the one that has happened in Paris, totally engulfing Naples. The nobility and royalists in Naples appeal to Queen Carolina to save their valuables and help them move to a safer part of the kingdom. And Carolina personally visits Nelson, Emma and Sir William at the embassy to obtain their aid. On behalf of the British government, Sir William charters 2 Greek ships and puts them at the disposal of the Queen. King Ferdinand orders his army to quell the riot, and the soldiers attack the mainly unarmed crowd, and the situation starts to mirror the French Revolution in Paris. Carolina and Ferdinand decide that they must remove themselves and their possessions to a safer place, their palace in Sicily at Palermo. Queen Carolina returns to the embassy, and Nelson agrees to put his ships at their personal disposal. The King and Queen want their valuables and the royal fortune evacuated with them, so it's agreed that the golden valuables will be secretly brought by a loyal officer to Sir William and Emma's house by the back door. They are then repacked by Emma and William personally into the same packing cases that were used to send his collection off in the Colossus. Nelson's sailors collect the cases openly from Sir William's house and put them on board HMS Foudroyant. This all has to be kept secret, even from the Hamilton servants, as they are nearly all Neapolitan and sympathetic to the revolutionary Republican cause. The Hamiltons give their servants the evening off, telling them that they're going to visit friends in the country for a few weeks. After midnight, the coach carrying the royal family arrives on the beach where Nelson's boats are waiting. King Ferdinand, Queen Carolina with their 8 children are joined by Emma and Sir William, and Nelson's men row them all out to the waiting HMS Foudroyant. The ship is unable to sail immediately as a violent storm is forecast, but when King Ferdinand is questioned by Nelson, he confesses that his army has been totally defeated by the French sympathizers and that French forces are approaching Naples. Rather than risk the possible attack or blockading of his fleet by the French men of war, Nelson decides to sail for Palermo despite the appalling weather forecast, which results in a 300-mile voyage which is dreadful and storm-bound. All the royal family are seasick, as is William Hamilton. Emma nurses the youngest royal child, the 6-year-old Count Alberto, who, in spite of her attentions, dies in her arms. She's dreadfully upset, and when she tells Nelson, he hugs and comforts her, and this begins a new stage in their relationship. HMS Foudroyant eventually drops anchor in the shelter and calm of Palermo harbour, where the royal family disembark and move into their palace. Emma and Sir William move into the British ambassadorial residence in Palermo. It's a house used only very occasionally, with only around 20 rooms and rather sparsely furnished. Sir William, weakened by the voyage and the loss of his beautiful Naples home, is very down. But, prompted by Emma, he insists that Nelson should move in and stay with them. Admiral Horatio Nelson is very pleased to accept, leaving Captain Troubridge in command of his flagship, the HMS Foudroyant, in Palermo harbour. Emma, as wife of the British ambassador, is determined to establish her place as leader of society in Palermo. She throws a huge dinner party and invites all the international dignitaries. The dinner is a huge success, with Emma heading one end of the table, with Nelson on her right, who can now hardly take his eyes off her. The evening is rounded off by Emma giving a display of her attitudes. The only slightly sour note is that towards the end of her performance, Emma falls to the floor portraying a dying nymph, and one of the members of the party, thinking she has fainted, throws a jug of water in her face. News arrives in a letter to Sir William from his nephew Charles Greville that the HMS Colossus has sunk off the Scillies. In bad winter weather, Colossus sighted the Isles of Scilly and decided to anchor in St Mary's Roads, where she intended to ride out the storm. The anchor cable parted and the ship ran aground on a submerged ledge of rock off Samson Island and later sank. All that has been recovered of Sir William's collection and fortune are 2 small crates of vases. Sir William is distraught, partly for the loss of the world's greatest collection of Greek and Etruscan vases, but mainly because this collection had represented most of his entire wealth, and he had intended selling it all in London. Emma helps the distraught William to his bedroom, where he stays for several days. Nelson is understandably shocked, but Emma tells him that as long as the 3 of them stick together, Nelson, Emma and William, they can fight the world. Nelson agrees with William that he will pay half the running costs of the house. It's spring in Palermo, and Emma and Nelson walk together daily on the Palermo promenade, and they are plainly falling in love. The sea and the countryside are very beautiful, as indeed are Emma and Nelson. They are now sleeping together in the embassy, and gossip is now rife in Palermo. William is aware of the relationship between Nelson and Emma. William, perhaps because of his own age and impotency, indicates that provided they treat him with respect as a friend and their companion, he is okay with the situation. King Ferdinand receives the good news that his army has recaptured much of Naples, and he summons Nelson to the palace, asking him to take his ships into Naples Bay to consolidate the success. Nelson, who doesn't want to leave Palermo, or rather doesn't want to leave Emma, tells the king that he will think about it and goes on board his flagship, HMS Foudroyant, to discuss the matter with its commanding officer, Captain Thomas Troubridge. Troubridge politely tries to indicate that the Admiralty is aware and worried by Nelson's activities with Lady Hamilton, and that the other captains of Nelson's warships in the Mediterranean want action led by a seagoing rather than land-bound leader. Then the news arrives that the French fleet has broken out of Brest and is heading for the Mediterranean to join up with the Spanish fleets. Nelson has no choice but to put to sea with all his ships to fight the joint French and Spanish fleets. This immediately puts an end to any possibility of helping King Ferdinand by sending English forces to liberate Naples. Sir William visits the angry King Ferdinand, who is extremely displeased and tries to placate him. Hamilton has always felt that Nelson's brilliance at sea was not matched by his diplomacy in dealing with shore-based political matters. Hamilton agrees to try to persuade Nelson to aid in the recapture of Naples when he returns, but suggests that the that approaches to Emma via Queen Carolina might be useful. Admiral Nelson sails back into Palermo and moves back into the embassy, and Emma talks with him about Queen Carolina's request. Admiral Horatio Nelson agrees to help King Ferdinand of Naples with the blockade and recapture of his city, but feels the best place for him to command this operation from is Sir William's embassy in Palermo, where Lady Emma Hamilton lives. Captain Trowbridge is put in charge of the operation and sails for Naples, whilst Emma and Nelson walk on the promenade and in the gardens of Palermo, very much in love. Trowbridge sails into Naples and decides he doesn't have sufficient force to retake the city unaided. He messages back that the King and Queen should agree with Nelson to allow Neapolitan troops to be embarked in Nelson's remaining ships and sail for Naples. Queen Carolina, who is of course totally aware of Emma's relationship with Nelson, asks her to intercede with him. Nelson invites Emma and Sir William to come on board HMS Foudroyant for dinner, after which Sir William retires early to a spare cabin. Emma and Nelson spend the evening together in his stateroom, during which she asks him to allow the Neapolitan troops to come on board his ships and to personally take command of the Naples liberation. Emma further suggests that she and Sir William could accompany Nelson to Naples in HMS Foudroyant so that all three can be together. Of course, Nelson agrees with this, loads the Neapolitan troops into his ships, and with Sir William and Emma on board, Nelson's fleet set sail for Naples, a distance of some 300 miles. The short voyage is not all joy. Nelson remarks to Captain Trowbridge that he's doing this for Emma, and Trowbridge responds that this action against the revolutionaries in Naples is not perhaps the best use of the English Navy. Possibly the ships would be better used seeking and destroying the French and Spanish warships. History suggests that, at this time, Admiral Horatio Nelson was a terrible commander of the British Navy in the Mediterranean because of spending all his time with Emma rather than fighting the French and the Spanish at every opportunity. HMS Foudroyant arrives in Naples Bay, and Nelson is surprised to see flags of truce flying from the forts. He dispatches Captain Trowbridge to go ashore and inform the rebels that he intends the total destruction of all anti-royalist revolutionaries and the French military forces by bombarding the forts, unless the rebels and the French surrender at once. Cardinal Fabrizio Ruffo, who had mobilized the peasants, also meets with Captain Trowbridge and says that he is the one who will personally conduct the peace treaty with the French as he sees fit. Trowbridge persuades Cardinal Ruffo to come out to HMS Foudroyant and speak with Nelson. When the Cardinal arrives on board, Nelson, with Emma and Sir William at his side, confronts Ruffo. They have a terrible row, which ends with Nelson telling Ruffo to go back and warn the rebels that he intends to start bombarding the fort where the rebels and most of the French are within the next 24 hours. Ruffo returns, warns the occupants of the forts, who know they are no match for the guns of Nelson's ship of the line. Then, the leader of the Royal Family Resistance Movement in Naples comes on board to see Emma, who is officially representing Queen Carolina. He tells her that his large group of loyal resistance fighters require weapons to attack and kill the French and the rebels. Emma goes to Nelson, and he orders that the arms be handed out to the resistance fighters, who promptly attack the rebels and the French. However, within hours it turns into a general attack on all civilians. Killing, robbery, rape and mayhem become the order of the day throughout Naples. Hamilton, seeing that the situation is getting out of hand, sends a message back to King Ferdinand saying that he'd better come quickly and take over his country. Nelson agrees with Hamilton that things have gone too far and tells Captain Rufo that he and any Republicans who wish to leave the country and escape the carnage may do so now, but the French military are not to be allowed to escape. Rufo immediately arranges for neutral ships in the harbour to carry his Republican refugees back to Rome. Emma, as Queen Carolina's personal representative, has become very much the mistress of Nelson's ship. When a sloop arrives from Palermo carrying gold from Queen Carolina, it is Emma herself who distributes it to the loyalists and resistance fighters as she sees fit, and Naples is retaken on behalf of the monarchy. King Ferdinand arrives and comes on board HMS Foudroyant, and Nelson is heartily congratulated and praised by the king, together with Queen Carolina's gratitude to Emma. With King Ferdinand now re-established in Naples, Nelson, Emma and Hamilton sail back to Palermo, leaving Captain Trowbridge in local command of the English squadron that remains in Naples harbour. On arrival in Palermo, the trio are greeted by a rapturous Queen Carolina, who has a splendid party arranged for them at the palace, the centrepiece being 3 life-size wax statues of Nelson, Emma and Sir William. Nelson is rewarded with an Italian dukedom of a province situated 5 miles to the north of the town of Bronte, with views of Mount Etna, with an income worth £3,000 a year. That's £320,000 a year in today's money. A chest of gold is presented to Nelson for him to divide among the captains and crews of his ships. Sir William is presented with a picture of King Ferdinand, studded with diamonds, and Emma is showered with jewellery. While Emma and Nelson are adored for their military triumphs by the Queen and the people of Palermo, Sir William retreats to his bedroom with a recurrence of his previous ill health. Lord and Lady Elgin, of Marbles fame, who are old friends of Sir William and his first wife, arrive in Palermo and stay with the Hamiltons in the embassy. The Elgins are shocked at the obvious affair between Emma and Nelson, feeling their old friend Sir William has made a fool of himself by taking this common, unfaithful younger woman to be his wife. Emma is very conscious of their disdain, and in vengeance arranges for them to be presented at court to Queen Carolina, telling Lord and Lady Elgin that it is to be an informal meeting in informal dress. Lady Elgin dresses normally, but when there is no time left for her to change, Emma joins them in the carriage to drive to the palace dressed in her very best court gown, bedecked in diamonds. At a very, very formal royal court reception, the Elgins, in their very, very informal costumes, are presented to Queen Carolina. Admiral Lord Keith, Commander-in-Chief of the Mediterranean fleets, arrives in Palermo with orders from William Pitt, the Prime Minister, to find out if the socially unacceptable rumours of Nelson's affair with Lady Emma Hamilton have any substance. Keith's orders are to either quash the rumours or order Nelson to return to England and his wife before he ruins his reputation, and that of the Royal Navy and England. Meanwhile, Sir William receives news that a successor has been appointed to his post as ambassador to Naples and will be arriving in a few days. After 36 years of being ambassador, the news of this abrupt dismissal comes as a terrible shock to William. Emma rushes off to see Queen Carolina, who promises to get King Ferdinand to write to the British Home Secretary. Emma returns with the news that the Queen is certain King Ferdinand can persuade the Home Secretary to change his mind and reinstate Sir William as ambassador. Nelson meets with Lord Keith at the Hamiltons' house, rather than on board HMS Foudroyant, which would have been more courteous, and the meeting between the two admirals is decidedly chilly. Keith is of the opinion that Nelson is behaving like a stupid, sentimental fool. The reply to King Ferdinand's letter arrives, in which the English Home Secretary politely tells Ferdinand to mind his own business, and Sir William receives a further letter ordering him to return to England. Nelson is also ordered to return to England. Queen Carolina, on hearing of the double recalls, meets with Emma and Nelson and suggests they should all travel together in one of Nelson's ships to Leghorn. From there, Nelson would continue by sea via Gibraltar back to England, whilst Emma and Sir William would travel overland by coach across Europe. This would give Emma and Nelson a little bit more time together. The short voyage has a mood and atmosphere of a luxury cruise. Aided and abetted by the Queen, Mrs. Cadogan, and Emma's black maid Fatima, Emma is able to spend much of the time with Nelson, and it would appear that their daughter Horatia is conceived during this voyage. When Emma eventually arrives in England, she is pregnant with Nelson's child. On arrival at Leghorn, Carolina presents Emma with jewellery and promises of everlasting friendship, and gives Nelson a gold medallion. He is unable to bear the idea of being separated from Emma, so decides to travel overland back to England, across Europe, avoiding French territory, with the Hamilton party. Back in England, Nelson's wife, Lady Fanny, receives news of his homecoming, so with Nelson's father, the Reverend Edmund Nelson, she moves to London and into the Nerots Hotel in St. James to await return of her very famous husband. Fanny Nelson is understandably concerned, as she's been told of how the beautiful Lady Hamilton always sits on Nelson's right so she can cut up his meat for him, and the rumours of the scandalous tria juncta in uno, 3 joined in 1, had also filtered through to her. Nelson and the Hamiltons continue their long journey across Europe, with Nelson receiving much acclaim whenever they stop. The party eventually lands in Great Yarmouth, where Nelson steps ashore to as big a hero's welcome as he received in Naples. Back at Nerots Hotel, London, Fanny, Nelson, with the Reverend Edmund, await for Nelson's arrival in the foyer of the hotel, and she is shocked when her husband enters the hotel with Emma and Sir William Hamilton instead of alone. She is, however, pleased to note that Lady Hamilton is not quite as slim as she had been led to expect, and shows signs of tiredness. Nelson's greeting of his wife Fanny is somewhat cool and formal, and the atmosphere when they all go into dinner is strained. Emma, however, rises to the occasion by making a great fuss of both Nelson's father Edmund and of Fanny. The improved atmosphere, however, falls apart when Fanny, having spent a considerable time peeling walnuts for Nelson, hands the bowl to him and has it knocked out of her hand with the comment that he, Nelson, hates the things. The next morning, Nelson departs to receive a ceremonial sword from the Lord Mayor of London, leaving Edmund and Fanny to be entertained by Emma and Sir William. Emma homes in on Edmund and charms him off his feet, while Sir William is kind and attentive to Fanny Nelson. Nelson and Fanny move into an expensive rented London apartment, whilst Emma and Sir William move into a friend's house, which is only a short walking distance away from the apartment. Nelson is now eating and dressing, aided by his wife Fanny instead of Emma. Both Nelson and Sir William are invited to St. James's Palace for His Majesty King George's levee, which is an afternoon assembly at which the British sovereign receives only men, and they both expect that the king will receive them as conquering heroes. At the levee, Hamilton and Nelson await the arrival of King George, who arrives and talks with the other people present. After some time, he comes across to Nelson and Hamilton. The king asks after Hamilton's health, and hardly waiting for a reply, turns his back on the pair and ignores them for the rest of the afternoon. Nelson returns home to Fanny and blames her for the royal insult. Although gentlemen are willing to visit Emma and William, many wives prefer not to mix with a woman of Lady Hamilton's reputation. Emma's secret pregnancy is advancing, and when she and William entertain Lord Palmerston and his mistress Emily Lamb to a dinner party, Palmerston whispers an aside about the fatness of Emma and can't think what Nelson sees in her. Nelson finds the excuse to spend several evenings at the Hamiltons, helping Sir William with his accounts, who now owes Nelson almost £2,250, which is around £250,000 in today's money. William always retires early, allowing Nelson and Emma time together. Because of his frustrating separation from Emma, the relationship in the Nelson household is deteriorating fast, and Nelson always blames Emma for all the problems. To celebrate his taking of his seat in the House of Lords, Nelson books a large box at Drury Lane Theatre for a performance of Sheridan's Pizarro. The party consists of Nelson's father Edmund, Emma and William, a princess from Queen Carolina's court, and of course Fanny and Nelson. Because the news is out that the great Lord Nelson is attending the performance, there is a full house. During the second act, when Rolla and Elvira plan the death of Alonso, Lady Fanny Nelson stops the performance with a loud scream and a fainting fit. Emma and Nelson's father take her home, whilst Nelson stays on to see the rest of the play. When Nelson returns home, a great row ensues. It all finishes with Nelson saying that although Fanny has never done anything wrong, he doesn't want to live with her anymore, and they agree to separate, with Fanny returning to their family home. Emma, now heavily pregnant, is only weeks away from her time and receives news that he and his wife Fanny have separated, and he's now almost free to marry her. She's aware that the press and the public are not her friends, and that, unlike in Naples, she is not highly regarded by London society. As far as Emma knows, Sir William has no idea that she's pregnant, or perhaps he chooses not to notice. She plans shortly to have a cold and retire to her bedroom until her confinement has taken place. Emma and Nelson consider it necessary that the child should be looked after by someone in the neighbourhood, and so her mum, Mrs. Cadogan, finds a woman called Mrs. Gibson, who lives nearby and can look after the baby when it's born. Nelson is promoted to Vice Admiral of the Blue and travels to Plymouth, where he's granted the freedom of the city. 8 days later, Emma secretly gives birth to their daughter Horatia, with only her mum, Mrs. Cadogan, and her maid Fatima present. Mrs. Gibson is given a large amount of money up front, plus weekly payments to act as guardian to the baby. She's told the child belongs to a dear friend of Emma's and is to be given the best wet nurses available. Back in Plymouth, Nelson's delighted, but disappointed when he's instructed to move his flag from HMS San Joseph to HMS St. George in preparation for a planned expedition to the Baltic. Nelson writes to Emma saying how thrilled he is that he should be the father of the first child Emma has ever born. Nobody has mentioned the fact to Nelson that Emma's first child, Emma Carew, is now almost 19 years old and living in Manchester. At the same time, the Gilroy cartoon of a very fat Emma is published, titled Dido in Despair, and beside it the doggerel, "Ah, where and oh, where is my gallant sailor gone? He's gone to fight the French for George upon the throne. He's gone to fight the French to lose his other arm and eye, and left me with an old antiquity to lay me down and die." In the meantime, the old antiquity, aka Sir William Hamilton, has finances that are in a very poor state due to the loss of all his Etruscan vases and valuables in the Colossus and his job as ambassador. He and Greville set about looking for pictures and other items that still decorate his house that can be put into an auction sale at Christie's. Greville persuades William to include the Romney portrait of Emma, which is bound to fetch a good price. In the end, the auction nets almost £5,000, which is nearly £500,000 in today's money, thus temporarily solving his financial difficulties. The Prince of Wales is at the auction and meets Sir William. He's heard so much about the famous Emma, and he wishes to be invited to Sir William's for dinner in order to meet her. Sir William cannot refuse a future king. When the Prince of Wales arrives for dinner at the Hamiltons, he's very taken with the now much slimmer Emma, and only by pleading indisposition can she escape his amorous advances. The Prince of Wales, who becomes King George IV, is infatuated with Emma and continues to make advances. Nelson is consumed by jealousy, inspiring a remarkable letter by Sir William to Nelson, assuring him that Emma is being faithful. Nelson eventually returns to London and meets his newborn daughter Horatia at Mrs. Gibson's. Nelson's 10 brothers and sisters were well aware of the pregnancy, and his elder brother, Reverend William Nelson, had written to Emma praising her virtue and goodness. Sir William and Emma, with their finances restored, throw a party for their friends and relations. The Reverend Edmund Nelson and Catherine, Nelson's sister, with her husband George Macham, also attend. Emma makes a great fuss of Nelson's relations and treats them as guests of honour. The success of the party is crowned by the arrival of the news that Nelson has won a great victory at Copenhagen. Emma becomes wild with joy and dances the tarantella with Sir William until he collapses exhausted, and she has to continue solo. Nelson arrives back in England and at the Hamiltons' house is greeted by the 36-year-old Emma and the 71-year-old Sir William, who is delighted for the success and glory that surrounds his friend. He invites Nelson, now homeless, to move in with them so that the three can live once more, tria, juncta in uno, three joined in one, as they had done before in both Naples and Palermo. Nelson is delighted to accept. Emma takes Nelson out into Regent's Park for a rendezvous with Mrs. Gibson and their baby Horatio. And once more, Nelson tells Emma that she is in all ways his one and only wife, except in law. Meanwhile, his legal wife, Lady Fanny Nelson, receives a visit from her father-in-law, the Reverend Edmund Nelson, and his son William Nelson, and his wife Sarah. They have arrived with the news of Nelson's return to England and that he's been made a Viscount for his victory at Copenhagen. Fanny is sad and bitter that Nelson has not contacted her since they split up in London. Her last letter to him, returned, opened with the words in Nelson's handwriting, opened in error but returned unread, on the envelope. Emma is now concerned by the scandals that are developing, with Nelson living openly in her and Sir William's house. She's concerned that her reputation will suffer irreparable damage if their mode of living continues. Nelson suggests that Emma should look for a small, modest farm that he could buy. Even as a Viscount and Vice Admiral, his means were limited, but a small farm with a few acres of good land should be possible. Nelson returns to sea, and Emma quickly finds a very substantial gentleman's country house just outside London at Merton Place. The house has a good few acres of land surrounding it and an adjoining farm that is also shortly to be for sale. Nelson's friend, Alexander Davidson, investigates the title of the house and its price and feels that it's a suitable home for England's hero. Alexander Davidson owned textile factories and merchant ships. He also worked as a supply agent for the British government, procuring supplies for the military, and was a multimillionaire. He had a close friendship with Nelson, who had bought him business as a prize agent after the Battle of the Nile and the Battle of Copenhagen. His brother William Nelson and his wife Catherine and their 3 children visit Emma and are very aware that the Nelson-Emma relationship is a strong and lasting one. In spite of Emma making offhand references about Tom Tit, Nelson's wife Fanny, all goes reasonably well, and Emma feels she's becoming part of the Nelson family. Nelson returns on leave and is taken to see Merton Place by Emma and Davidson. He's delighted with the house and with Emma's idea that the small river running through the ground should be renamed the Nile. The price of £9,000, which equates to almost £500,000 in today's money, was more than the figure he had in mind for a modest farm. But Alexander Davidson is delighted to lend him, free of interest, the odd few thousands he is short. With this loan, Nelson purchases a somewhat run-down house at Merton Place. Whilst Nelson is away at sea, Emma visits to supervise the repairs and redecorations, plus installing items to the glorification of Nelson's achievements. That Christmas, with little Horatio, who's collected by Mrs. Cadogan, and with Sir William and Emma, they all move down to Merton Place, to be joined by William Nelson, Catherine and their children. The Christmas festivities are crowned by the christening of Fatima, the Black Maid given by Nelson to Emma in Naples. After Christmas, Emma and Sir William, who's feeling unwell, return to London. Nelson is not alone in Merton Place for long. He gets an urgent message from Emma saying that Sir William is very ill. Nelson arrives that afternoon at the Hamiltons' house, and at 10 o'clock that night, Sir William Hamilton dies in the arms of Emma, with Nelson holding his hand. Emma is actually deeply distressed about the death of William, but this doesn't stop her publicly displaying high theatrical emotions and playing the part of the deeply distressed widow. At the funeral, Nelson is applauded by the crowd, but Emma is jeered and laughed at in her very expensive costume of deep mourning. Sir William's will reveals that Emma has been left a small income of £700 a year, about £50,000 in today's money. He says of Nelson in his will, "God bless him, and shame fall on those who do not say amen." And he leaves Nelson a portrait of Emma painted by Henry Bone. The house owned by Sir William, in which Emma is living, 22 Piccadilly, along with the residue of the estate, is left to Charles Greville. Emma is shocked at how small her future income is to be, when almost immediately Charles Greville asks Emma to find alternative accommodation so that he can sell the Piccadilly property. Nelson feels that now at least one of them is free and that they must start thinking about the future of little Horatio, who, one day, without too much scandal, they will adopt. They have Horatia christened in a small London church under the name of Horatia Nelson Thompson, the child of an old friend now sadly deceased. Emma finds a London house to rent in Claridge's Street and has her possessions moved out of the Piccadilly property. Greville doesn't pay her monthly inheritance income regularly, and when he does, he deducts tax before sending it to her. When Nelson returns on leave, he and Emma tour Merton Place, which they call the farm, planning improvements. Nelson's very proud of Merton Place, and he wants to see the alterations carried out as soon as possible. He wants it made into an English country home of perfection for his family, Emma and the little Horatia. This is the summer of Nelson and Emma's love. There is a housewarming party to which Nelson's father, brothers and sisters, together with their families, are all invited. Everyone in the family now accepts that Emma is Nelson's wife in every way except law. They also realise that if they want to retain the affection of their famous and heroic brother, they must accept Emma as his wife. Some genuinely like Emma and are entranced with her. Others have reservations, thinking Nelson's association with a woman of doubtful character might in some way diminish the reflected glory that they enjoy. Alexander Davidson arrives with the news that the farm adjoining Merton Place is now for sale, and that if Nelson buys it, then Merton Place will become self-sufficient. Nelson, whose resources have already been stretched by the purchase of Merton Place, says he's unable to afford the farm, so Davidson offers a further loan, which Nelson accepts, as the income from the farm will financially support Merton Place. The news arrives that Nelson is promoted to Vice Admiral of the White, and, in order to keep some appearance of respectability, Emma returns to her Claridge's Street home and starts to organise a party to celebrate Nelson's promotion. Her mother, Mrs. Cadogan, stays on at Merton Place as resident housekeeper, and Nelson allows her £100 a month for the running of the house. Emma realises this will in no way cover the expenses of running Merton Place, but Emma is in such a summer of happiness that she refuses to worry about it. The party at Claridge's Street starts, but is interrupted by the news that war has again been declared by France, and that the French fleet under Admiral Villeneuve is on the rampage. Nelson departs immediately for Portsmouth, and Emma, who has been feeling unwell, discovers she is once again pregnant. Little Horatia is returned to the care of Mrs. Gibson whilst the renovation and landscaping continues at Merton Place under Emma's instructions. Emma employs London's best interior designers, upholsterers and architects planning the new look Merton Place, which she wants completed for when Nelson returns. Emma goes round to Mrs. Gibson's to see her daughter and is surprised to find that Horatia is out with Mrs. Gibson's daughter. Mrs. Gibson, who's not been paid for some months, realises that she's looking after the illegitimate daughter of England's greatest naval hero and feels she should be paid a substantial bonus. If this bonus is not paid, then the child will not be available for visits by Emma or Nelson. Emma knows that Mrs. Gibson could totally ruin her reputation by revealing that she is Nelson's mistress and that she gave birth to Nelson's child during Sir William Hamilton's lifetime. Things deteriorate further when, on returning home to Claridge's Street, she finds her mum, Mrs. Cadogan, waiting with the news that the local Merton tradespeople are tired of waiting for their money. Unless Emma can pay the Merton Place coal merchants, greengrocers and so on, there is going to be trouble. What concerns her even more is the problem of quickly raising the cash to pay off the blackmailing Mrs. Gibson. Emma sends Fatima off to pawn one of Queen Carolina's bracelets and gives some of the money to Mrs. Cadogan to pay off the tradespeople in Merton. With the rest of the money from Queen Carolina's bracelet, Fatima, accompanied by a strong burly footman, is sent to pay off Mrs. Gibson and to recover the baby Horatia, and to warn off Mrs. Gibson from trying further blackmail. Emma sits down to look at her account books and discovers that since Sir William's death she has run up serious debts. More than half is because of the various alterations being made to Merton Place, and partly her and Nelson's extravagant entertaining. Emma's not unduly concerned over this debt, as most of it is Nelson's and can be sorted out on his return. Baby Horatia is returned to her mother's arms in a rather sorry state, suffering from some mysterious illness, which the pregnant Emma also contracts. Despite this, Emma and her household travel down to Merton Place, where shortly after her arrival she goes into labour. As the child must also be kept a secret, Mrs. Cadogan and Fatima once more assist, but tragically it's stillborn. Nelson arrives back in England, having chased the French Admiral Villeneuve across the Atlantic and back without catching him. He's delighted with the altered and redecorated Merton Place, which is now covered in pictures of him, his ships and his battles. The stream which runs through the grounds has been renamed the Nile. Nelson reports to the Admiralty and the Prime Minister, William Pitt, on his chase after the French, and takes the opportunity to remind Pitt about Emma's work in Naples when she stood in for Sir William during his long illness. Pitt agrees that she should be rewarded, as he is keen to keep happy the famous hero who has the ability to destroy the French. Horatia stays at Merton Place with Mrs. Cadogan, who's finding it hard to run the house on the Nelson allowance. For appearance sake, Emma moves out of Merton Place and back to Clarges Street, and Nelson moves into rented rooms close by. He is under the full glare of publicity, so they're careful not to spend the night together at either London address. Nelson suggests that Emma should invite his sisters and brothers with their families to stay at Merton Place, so that with due respectability, he and Emma can entertain them and also spend their nights together. Emma also invites the old Marquis of Queensberry of boxing fame and Alexander Davidson to this extended house party. The period is a very happy one for Nelson and Emma in their newly decorated home, with their own child surrounded by friends and relations. Nelson is of course frequently required to report to the Admiralty, but every night he's able to return to the arms of his Emma. Captain Blackwood stops off at Merton Place from Portsmouth on his way to the Admiralty. He informs Nelson that Villeneuve and the combined French and Spanish fleets have been sighted in Cadiz harbour. The Marquis of Queensberry lends Nelson his carriage so he can follow Blackwood to the Admiralty, and Emma sets about packing Nelson's sea trunks. Nelson returns, and with Emma goes up to Horatia's nursery and kisses their only child goodbye, and then leaves for Portsmouth. Rumours of a great and victorious battle fought and won off Cape Trafalgar has already reached Merton Place, when Captain John Whitby is sent by the Admiralty to break the news of Vice Admiral Lord Nelson's death to Lady Hamilton. Nelson's body is landed at Portsmouth, and Captain Hardy arrives at Merton with the unopened letters and relics that Nelson has bequeathed to Emma. For a short time, the two people who loved Nelson most share each other's grief, surrounded by Nelson's half-finished letters to his darling Emma, the blood-stained uniform coat, and a lock of hair. Emma said, "My heart and head are gone forever." The diary, with Nelson's bequest to the nation, in which Nelson asks the government and country to take care of Emma should anything happen to him, is shown to Emma by Hardy. Captain Hardy then takes the diary to the Prime Minister, William Pitt, who passes it on to the Admiralty, who send it on to the eldest of Nelson's brothers, the Reverend William. Emma is deprived of all further contact with Nelson and is not invited to any of the state funeral arrangements in which Parliament and indeed the whole country honour their greatest hero. Emma remains isolated and ignored in Merton. Parliament votes an earldom to Nelson's eldest brother William, together with £10,000 to buy an estate and an income of £5,000 a year. Every brother and sister receives a gift of £10,000, and Lady Fanny Nelson receives an additional £2,000 a year on top of her Admiralty's widow's pensions. In spite of Nelson's last written words, his bequest to the nation, nothing is given to Emma. The reading of Nelson's will leaves Emma the Merton Place house to be entirely hers, together with the small and erratic income from the Bronte estates in Italy. Nelson also leaves little Horatia a small annuity to be administered by Emma. Nelson had only recently acquired the neighbouring farm with its substantial income, which supported Merton Place. He'd not got round to making a codicil to his will to include it in the gift of Merton Place to Emma. As he was dying, Nelson had realised Emma would not be able to maintain their high standard of living, which was why he had left that responsibility to William Pitt and the nation. Nelson's elder brother, now Earl Nelson, arrives at Merton Place and presents Emma with all the bills Nelson had run up for redecorations and alterations to the house, some £8,000 worth. He tells her that he intends to sell the new farm section of the Merton Place estate. Emma asks William what he's doing about Nelson's request in the diary to the nation that she should be financially looked after. Angrily, Earl Nelson throws Nelson's diary with the bequest in it across the table to her, saying he'd done all he can, and stalks out. Catherine, Nelson's sister and her husband, under the impression that Emma was left a wealthy woman by Sir William, merely offer their services in respect of helping bring up Nelson's only child, Horatia. Alexander Davidson guesses that she has desperate financial problems and advises her to approach the Prime Minister personally and pursue Nelson's last request. Emma gains an interview with the new Prime Minister, Lord Greville, who has little time for a woman of doubtful reputation and makes it clear that he will not further her cause. The income from the Italian Bronte estates has now reduced to a mere trickle, and the only money Emma has coming in is the £800 a year less tax from Sir William's estate, and the small annuity left by Nelson for Horatia's education, which Emma refuses to touch. She decides that Merton Place must be sold to pay the debts, but in spite of the estate agent's efforts, no buyers appear, and Emma starts to drink and neglect her appearance. A further blow arrives in the form of her illegitimate daughter from her youth, Emma Carew. Nelson had no idea of her existence, thinking proudly that Horatia was the first and only child Emma had ever given birth to. Emma Carew planned to go to America with her boyfriend and wanted a nest egg to start them off in the new world. The young lady presented herself at Merton Place and demanded a share of her mother's apparent fortune. Emma, possibly worse for drink, would have nothing to do with her, and after a screaming match, Emma Carew was thrown out of the house. Emma decides that the only way of surviving financially is by trying yet again to get the government to accede to Nelson's last request. She decides to enlist the help of her noble friends and her distant admirer, the Prince of Wales, the future King of England. Emma and Mrs. Cadogan gather their last pennies together to throw a grand dinner party for the Prince of Wales, the Marquis of Queensberry, Sir Charles Greville, and other wealthy friends. It is an unmitigated disaster. Emma is past her best, and she's no longer able to entertain as a delightful and sensual young thing. Her rather embarrassing display of drunken, off-key singing and badly performed attitudes only sends her illustrious guests off home early. Alexander Davidson calls and suggests that perhaps he and some friends might form a consortium and buy at a low price the Merton Place property in order to give her some cash immediately. As soon as they find a buyer at the proper price, they'll pass the profit on to Emma. She agrees, and Davidson sits down to examine her debts, which are now a staggering £17,000, almost $2 million in today's money. His consortium cannot give her that much, and he tells Emma that she must sell her furniture as well. Davidson would do more himself, but his own business is in serious trouble. He is not sure that he can personally survive financially, and later on goes bankrupt. During all these problems, a succession of language, music, and art teachers come to educate Horatia, paid for by Nelson's annuity to his daughter. Shortly before the auction sale of her furniture, Emma once more invites the Marquis of Queensberry down to stay. The rather dowdy and tired Emma still looks good to the short-sighted old gentleman, who gets great satisfaction from groping the somewhat overweight Emma. She explains to him that she must leave Merton Place, and wouldn't it be nice if she could live somewhere close to her dearest Q? The Marquis takes the hint and offers her a small house by the river at Richmond in Surrey. He will be able to visit her there once or twice a month, so Emma, with her mum and Horatia, move out of Merton Place and into the small Richmond property. Old Q regularly comes to Richmond for a grope and more, and Emma finds even more solace in a bottle when her mother, Mrs. Cadogan, dies. The monies from the Davidson Consortium buying Merton Place and the auction sale of all her furniture and furnishings have only paid part of the £2 million debt. Even in Richmond, Emma is being hounded by tradespeople. A local dealer, knowing her financial difficulties, calls and asks to buy her mementos of Nelson. Emma is so desperate that she agrees to sell a few, including the coat that Nelson died in. Then old Q dies, and for a short period Emma thinks she might inherit a fortune, but she's only left £500, around £80,000 in today's money. She tries to secretly hang on to this money instead of passing it on to pay her debts, but the tradespeople find out, send in the broker's men, and Emma is taken before the debtor's court. Emma is found guilty and made bankrupt. She is just able to pay enough to pay rent and bribes to stay in the debtors' rooms within the court of the temple. Horatia continues her education, and one of her teachers brings a publisher friend in. He persuades Emma to let him publish Nelson's letters to her. By this time, Emma is suffering from jaundice and nervous depression, so the publisher is able to buy the rights to the letters for just peanuts. Nelson's sister Catherine and her husband discover how very serious Emma's situation is and how fast she is deteriorating in body and soul. They arrange with the court that they will cover most of her debts, and they request her release. On receiving news that she's to be allowed out of the debtors' area of the temple, Emma books a passage for Horatia and herself in a scruffy little ship that trades between London Bridge Wharf and Calais. Secretly, under the cover of darkness, Emma and Horatia, with only hand baggage, set sail for France in the Little Tom, where the couple move in to lodgings at 27 Rue Française, Calais. Just one small room with an alcove for Horatia to sleep in. Lady Emma Hamilton, Nelson's mistress, died aged 49, 6 months later in the alcove that was her daughter's bed. The local British Council paid for the funeral expenses, and she was buried in a public cemetery just outside Calais. The only friend or relation present was her daughter Horatia, except that all the captains and officers of all the British ships in Calais harbour came to the funeral. The flags on their ships flew at half-mast in honour of the woman that England's greatest seaman loved and had left to the nation to look after and provide for. I hope you found the story of Nelson's mistress interesting. But if you'd like my original book of this true story, Nelson's Mistress, in book form, it's available as a digital download from my book site at gentlesailing.com, along with her other publications. My library of digital sailing books is at gentlesailing.com, so you can buy them as instant downloads. There's a link to a printer who can convert them to hard copy if that's what you prefer. I've just totally updated and republished French Canal Routes to the Mediterranean, which is now in its 12th edition and is fully up to date with new information, charts and pictures. Recently I published Your Boat in the Sun, which proved an instant popular success. It's about where to keep your boat in the Mediterranean or the Caribbean and the costs and the logistics involved. The Atlantic Crossing Guide has become a bestseller, and it outsells most of the others, probably because it's arguably one of the most comprehensive guides to sailing to the Caribbean that's available. The Gentle Sailing Route to the Mediterranean is one of the most popular publications that I have. It describes how to coast hop all the way to Gibraltar without having to spend a night at sea. There are books about marinas in the Med, sailing in the Caribbean islands, as well as a book on simple navigation, and even a Pacific Ocean crossing guide, and a book about just living aboard a sailing boat. Anyway, it's all at gentlesailing.com, so please do pay the site a visit and browse through my publications if you have a moment. Thanks. Fair winds.